journey, I want us to reflect on the sense of wonder. It's a good earthy Anglo-Saxon Teutonic word, wonder. It refers to our response to something that is surprising, something that's astonishing. Wonder is the name that we give to what takes our breath away, as we might say. The word, of course, has its Latin-based equivalents, such as marvel, and we may also talk about being astonished or amazed, but let's stick with this word, wonder. Wonder makes a good beginning. In a sense, all thought begins with wonder. There is, for example, the wonder that lies at the basis of all philosophy, giving rise to the most fundamental question of all: why does something exist rather than nothing? In fact, we have the authority of none other than the founder of philosophy, Socrates, for this, because according to Plato, Socrates originated the idea that wisdom begins in wonder. This, of course, was adopted by Aristotle, and so it informs the Western tradition of philosophy, which for 2,500 years, as A.N. Whitehead once said, has been nothing but a footnote to Plato. A.N. Whitehead himself, writing in the early 20th century, Whitehead was a friend of Bertrand Russell. Together they worked on a very significant book on mathematical logic when they were young. Whitehead wrote, not only did philosophy begin in wonder, but that if it's true philosophy, at the end of it all, the wonder must remain. Albert Einstein would certainly have agreed, I think, with Whitehead there. Einstein was supposed to have said, he who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead. His eyes are closed. To which, of course, we might add, I can't resist adding some words of Wittgenstein. Gosh, they're all contemporaries, aren't they, in the early 20th century. Wittgenstein uttered this warning. He says, man has to awaken to wonder, but he went on to say, science is a way of sending him to sleep again. Okay, you can discuss that over coffee after the service. But what do they mean by saying that wonder is the beginning of wisdom? Well, I think they meant that our sense of being surprised by experience is the origin of our questioning, and it's through questioning that we learn. Wonder makes us stop in our tracks, as it were, and pay attention to something. Wonder wakens us from complacency, from unthinking acceptance. Wonder makes us question our assumptions, the things we take for granted, our prejudices. Wonder draws us away from the broad, easy, popular path and sets our feet on the narrow, less travelled way that leads to what's new, maybe even perhaps to new life. Wonder breaks the prison bars and lets us step out into a new world. It's when we stop in amazement or in puzzlement that we can begin to explore, to put into words and rational thought that sense of astonishment, beginning so often with the question, what is it? What does it mean? Going on to think about how did it come to be? And then maybe going on to potentially the deepest of all questions, why is it so? And indeed, the simple question, why is it? And human beings are, of course, incurably curious. Animals may live to satisfy their physical desires, food and warmth, etc. But human beings are driven by a different desire as well, the desire to know. It's the thirst for truth. The call to understanding is a journey. It begins with that first step, the moment of wonder from which all else flows. This journey that begins in wonder is a source of both great pleasure and great heartache sometimes. But it's fundamental to our human nature. We live to understand. We live to seek and to find out what is true. If wonder is indeed the cutting edge of thought, it's no surprise to find the sense of wonder everywhere in the scriptures as the very proper response to the words and deeds of God. And supremely in the Old Testament, the theme of wonder is especially located in the amazing works of God in the Exodus from Egypt, the Israelites leaving slavery and going out into the wilderness and on into the promised land. Think of God's promise to Moses at the burning bush. God says, so I'll stretch out my hand, strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. And that promise is well kept. And so Moses can sing in the great hymn after crossing the Red Sea, Exodus 15, "Who among the gods is like you? Who is like you, Lord? Majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, and working wonders." The God of Israel does wonderful things, but by the time of the Judges, this is the expectation of his people. So one can understand Gideon's rather plaintive response to the angel of the Lord. This is Judges chapter 6. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon says to the angel. "Pardon me, my Lord, but if the Lord God is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now," says Gideon, "the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of the Midianites." That's Judges 6:13. And if you read on through that chapter and subsequent chapters, you'll see it's not long before Gideon observes at first hand the wonderful acts of the Lord renewed again in history. Later in the Old Testament writings, in the books of wisdom, we find Job and the psalm writers marveling at the wonders of God's creation. Job is reminded to stop and consider God's wonders. "Do you know how the clouds hang poised, those wonders of him who has perfect knowledge?" Before the God of wonders, Job backs down in awe. He says, "Surely I spoke of things I didn't understand, things that were too wonderful for me." And it's this looking with awe and amazement at the work of God's hands we find expressed in Psalm 8. "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars," then the psalm writer says, "moved to wonder. Then I begin to ask new questions. What are human beings that you're mindful of them? Human beings that you should care for them so much." The psalm is a song of wonder, and the wonder that leads to questions. But at the end of that psalm, have you noticed, after the questioning, the wonder returns in the last verse. "O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." Like Gideon, the danger for God's people is to lose the sense of wonder. The danger is to think that the ordinary and a certain reduced understanding of the ordinary is all that there is, to close our eyes and not be alert to what God is doing around us. But to a people grown hard and complacent, God speaks the promise of new wonders. Isaiah chapter 29. "Therefore, once more I will astound these people with wonder upon wonder. The wisdom of the wise will perish, the intelligence of the intelligent will vanish." And of course, only a little earlier in the prophecies, Isaiah has pointed us to another wonder, an amazing sign from God. Isaiah chapter 7, verse 14, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and he shall be called Emmanuel." On this Advent Sunday, as we raise our eyes to the promise of the Messiah and the fulfillment of the promise in the birth of Jesus, so we have to acknowledge once again that not only is Christmas a time of wonder, but that the greatest wonders are found not in tinsel or flashing lights. The greatest wonders are found in the nativity story. If this story of the birth of Jesus doesn't take our breath away every time we read it, then our hearts are grown cold and hard indeed. And the first wonder is found in our New Testament reading today concerning the preparation for the birth of John the Baptist. And it's the story of two ordinary, God-fearing and devout, but ordinary people, Zechariah and Elizabeth. Zechariah and Elizabeth, life has been good to them in many ways. They're well off, they're healthy, they're devout. They loved God and they sought to serve him like many of us here today. And they probably thought that things were as good as they were ever going to get, and that life would continue at this comfortable level as they entered into a contented old age. But of course they're not entirely contented. In their case, they had longed to have a child, but no child had been given to them. Humanly speaking, they were too old to hope any longer, and so they hid their disappointment. They tried to reconcile themselves with the way things were. Beneath their comfortable way of life, there is a sadness. There is a loss of hope, which perhaps they hardly dare to acknowledge anymore. But God, our God, is a God of wonders. And God broke into that comfortable existence with something new and something extraordinary. Something that will no doubt cause them suffering and heartbreak, but which lifts their lives up onto a new plane altogether. God promises them a child. And Zechariah, at least, is not very good at coping with the new and the surprising. Although he's a priest, he's a worshipper of the God who does amazing signs and wonders, Zechariah steps back from this announcement in fear and unbelief. How shall I know this? I'm an old man, my wife's well on in years, and so on. And I take all this to mean on Zechariah's lips, I take this to mean he's saying to the angel, I don't believe you. Even more, maybe there's a bit of an accusation there. I don't believe that God can still do wonderful things. And so, of course, to convince him, the angel adds another wonder. Zechariah loses his power of speech until the baby is born. It may be, just reflect on this, it may be about the time that John is born, about the time that Zechariah recovers his voice, it may be about that time that the God of wonders speaks to some other people. Some people who are far, far away. And he speaks to these other people, not by an angel, but by a star. And while John is born to Zechariah and Elizabeth in one of the villages of Judah, and while Mary is now 3 months into her pregnancy, so maybe she's leaving behind that stage of morning sickness, and she's beginning to bloom, as it were, maybe about that time, some wise men in Persia maybe, some 800 miles east, they have looked up at the stars and they've seen something surprising, something they didn't expect. They've seen something puzzling. They've seen something that leads them out of their everyday and comfortable existence. They've seen a new star in the sky. I'll talk a little bit next week about what this star might have been and how they might have understood it. But whatever it was, it led them to ask questions and to explore possibilities. What does this new star mean? How should we respond to it? What must we do? Many people must have seen that new star, something marvelous to behold. But most people didn't give it a second thought. They shrugged their shoulders and they went back to their ordinary lives. But these few, these magi, wise men, and wise indeed to pause and wonder, they couldn't leave it alone. The star occupied their daytime thoughts and their nighttime dreams. What does it mean? What does it mean? What must we do? They could have no rest until they understood, until they responded to that wonder in the sky by finding its meaning and then acting upon it. And this story is not just about and for strange people far away a long time ago. God is still a God of wonders. God does amazing things today. In fact, God's wonders, Psalmist and Job are absolutely right here, God's wonders are all around us. If only we will open our eyes, if only we will pause to think, to let the wonder be at work within us. It may be the little things that we hardly notice, but when we do, they unsettle us, they cause us to pause and question, to rethink, even to change the direction of our lives. So what are these wonders maybe surrounding us each day, waiting for us to open our eyes wide enough and pause to consider? There's a lovely series of examples in a poem by Robert Browning. Poem's called Bishop Blaugram's Apology. And in that poem he argues that even hardened atheists have their doubts, and simple wonders can trouble the hardest of hearts. And he imagines one of his characters saying, how can we guard our unbelief just when we're safest? There's a sunset touch, a fancy from a flower bell, someone's death, a chorus ending from Euripides, and that's enough for 50 hopes and fears to rap and knock and enter in our souls. There are wonders that can disturb our lack of belief. The starry sky above us and the moral law within us, so said Immanuel Kant. The beauty of the bluebell, so said Gerard Manley Hopkins. The splash of red blossom in a snowy landscape, that's P.J. Kavanagh, and he goes on to say it gives us joy, a presence transforming all other presences. Or maybe just looking up at the night sky in the winter. Great nights returning, says Vernon Watkins. These little things, little wonders, unsettle our easy disbelief, and they spur us on to seek and to ask questions and to explore. And just as the wise men set aside their easy way of life to pursue something extraordinary, so the extraordinary all around us calls us to lay aside this easy disbelief or these low expectations we have of God and to reach out for something more. Reach out a hand, if it were possible, to the living God, the God of all wonders. So on this first Advent Sunday, we've made a start on a new journey. And we begin that journey not when we set out upon the new road, but when we stop in the old road and our attention is caught by something different and strange. We begin when we stand wrapped in awe. Remember the exclamation mark? We stand wrapped in awe, and then we go on to explore new possibilities. It's the question mark. Our new journey begins, like all knowledge, when we awake to wonder. And at the end of the journey, well, walk with me over these 4 weeks of Advent as we pursue this road, responding with wonder to the signs of God, going on to understand them, travelling under their guidance, and at the end, arriving. And you say, arriving where? Well, the journey leads us to Jesus, but leads us to know Jesus afresh. The journey leads us to know Jesus more deeply, to be filled with new awe and wonder as we see him, as we see Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, Jesus, Son of Mary, as we see his perfect life, as we see his sacrifice upon the cross, that sign of his perfect love for us, and as we see the greatest wonder in all of history,